to be here for this conversation with Erin Molan, who is, as you all know, a broadcaster and journalist and one of Australia's most recognisable media figures. Now, for years, Erin was a fixture on Australian television, from 9 News to The Footy Show to hosting her own programme, Erin, on Sky News Australia. But after October 2023, something changed, and she became one of the clearest, most courageous voices defending Israel and calling out anti-Semitism in public life. So, Erin, welcome. It's absolutely wonderful to have you with us.
Bless you all, and thank you so much for having me. It's genuinely such an honour to be with you. I follow the events and the happenings in the UK very closely, and unfortunately for you guys, you provide me with a fair bit of material, the vast majority of it not overly positive. So I think of you often, I fight for you constantly, and I send all my love and thoughts, because I know times are very difficult for you there.
Well, thank you for that. And I often joke that, you know, we're doing the kind of worldwide disaster tour these days, speaking about these topics. And the worse things get, the bigger the interest is. So there's been a lot of interest, of course, in everything that you're doing, especially. And tonight we've got some questions as well from people who've sent them in, and I will weave them into our conversation as well. Now, you built a major career long before any of this. Some people might have known you here in the UK, but certainly plenty in Australia did, from sports and entertainment. So can you start by telling us a bit about your background in journalism and what that early world was like, let's say before what you are now?
Absolutely. So I started out as a sports journalist. So I guess I don't really know the UK equivalent, but I get told that I'm kind of like the Erin Andrews of Australia, in that I was the first woman to host Friday Night Footy and the Footy Show and different kind of variations of sporting programs in Australia, which was, I mean, I say challenging, being the first woman to move into a very male-dominated space, but I have redefined what challenging means since entering this sphere of work. The people that hated me back then were far less likely to kill me. The people who hate me now have much more of a tendency to do so. So it's a different perspective, absolutely. But look, I had an incredible 20 years in Australian television. I was incredibly grateful for all the opportunities. I loved it very passionately. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was sitting there, it was about 11 p.m. on a Friday night, hosting the football at a stadium, talking about some bloke's groin injury, and I kind of thought, there's got to be more to life. You know, this used to really excite me. Now, not so much. I'm a mum. I was always very politically engaged. I was very passionate about national security and foreign affairs. I'd grown up in Indonesia, so I was there in 1998 when the Suharto regime fell, and I watched a country fight, and I watched people give their lives for democracy and for freedom, the kind of things that we took for granted in Australia. I was just a teenager then, but it lit something inside of me that never really died. And whilst I did sport for a fair chunk of time, much of my life outside of that professional pursuit was spent talking to my dad, who was a major general and an Australian senator, about the goings on in the world and about things like that. So when Sky News Australia came and poached me, I guess you'd say, from Channel 9 to enter into this political commentary sphere, it was, the greatest decision, I think. Well, the second greatest decision I ever made in regards to what I'm doing now, I feel is even better and a much truer version of myself and much more purposeful work. But yeah, it's been a very mixed and diverse journey in the media, but I can absolutely hand on heart say that everything that has happened thus far has been for a reason, and I have zero regrets about any of it. And I wouldn't swap where I am today, despite the obvious challenges and the hardship in some ways. I wouldn't swap it for the world, because it's the most purposeful work I've ever done.
Well, that's great to hear. And I do wonder, actually, it's not a transition one hears about often in television or entertainment, to go from sports to really the hardest part of geopolitics and news. So was that transition one that you found hard in terms of the audience? Because, you know, as you said, being a woman, being a sports commentator, and then being a woman known for being a sports commentator, also somebody known for being glamorous and beautiful. And did people take you seriously immediately, or was it a battle?
Stop it. Thank you. Look, it's a great question. And I tell you what does make me laugh often. When I was a woman in those positions as a sports anchor, the amount of times that people would say to me, you have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know anything. You're a woman. Go back to the kitchen. Now that I've entered this sphere, all of the same people are saying, go back to sport. You're just a sports commentator. All you know is sport. Why are you entering this space? I said, you've got to make up your mind.
Well, it's like that old joke about the, Jews back to Palestine. And then when they did, it's Jews out of Palestine. So maybe being a woman in TV has been a similar experience.
Look, absolutely. But I find it more entertaining now than anything else. I think for me, Dad was such a huge part of my life in a very, I say this with love to my beautiful dad, who we lost a couple of years ago. I was famous prior to him being famous. I make that very clear. So he certainly didn't give me any kind of help in the early days, but he then became a very prominent politician. And he was a major general in the army, as I said, and fought in Iraq for a year. So he had a profile absolutely in those kinds of circles. But then he entered politics and became the most individually voted for politician in Australian history. And he was so loved by the Australian public. He was no nonsense, a big 6'6", giant of a man with the most beautiful smile, who cared deeply about people. He was, as I said, no nonsense, common sense, strength. He spoke through strength, and he knew that suicidal empathy was exactly that, suicidal. And I would often do things with him. And towards the latter end of my sporting career, I started to advocate for legislation in different spaces, i.e. The Online Safety Act, which was trying to keep our children safe online, and nothing to do with any kind of effort to impede free speech. It was very much so, if this is illegal in the real world, i.e. threatening to rape my unborn child, which was some of the things that I was receiving at those times, I felt that it should be just as illegal in the online space as it is in the real world. So I'd already dipped my toe in. And I think because people knew who Dad was and knew that that had always been a passion of mine outside of work. And you know what, all of that aside, my first show, I think you can tell straight away if someone knows what they're talking about, if someone has a clue, if someone's willing to do the work. And I think that regardless of what field I'm in, when I was hosting football, I would sit on this big panel with 5 or 6 ex-footballers who were legends of the game. So, your Wayne Rooney's, or, I'm trying to think of the equivalent in your neck of the woods. But I would sit there and I would have 40 pages of handwritten notes for 1 2-hour show. And the bloke next to me, a legend, would be sitting there on his betting app and be like, who's playing tonight, Darl? And that's because they were legends, right? They didn't have to know the ins and outs because they'd earned their right. They'd earned the right to be there. I hadn't. I wasn't a legend of the game. I hadn't played the game. So for me, earning my right to be there and earning my place was being utterly brilliant. And the only way I could do that was to work incredibly hard. I wish I was more naturally talented. It would mean I'd have to work less. But I think for me, it was putting in the work, because you can be attractive and you can get opportunities in different ways for different reasons, but you ain't going to last long unless you back it up with actual ability and you're willing to do the work. And, my show was called Erin. So if I wasn't up to the job, then, I'm in a bit of trouble there. So I think very quickly people ascertained that I knew what I was talking about, that I was engaged, that I was able to get interviews and guests that were relevant, that I was able to ask the right questions, and that I cared deeply. I think that was the kind of thing that in those early days on Sky News, it wasn't so much, Douglas Murray's brilliant. I'm not a Douglas Murray. I'm not a Natasha Halstorf. They're utterly brilliant. They have knowledge like I couldn't even imagine. They can recall facts and figures and the whole thing. Whereas from my perspective, I feel like heart is what I rely upon. And I like to make people feel, and I like to take the truth and then play on people's emotions in a way that it's what the other side does, but they do it with propaganda and with lies. What I try and do is take the truth and package it in a way that makes people feel, so they can see the humanity, and so they can then understand a perspective. So I think for me, that heart and that passion and that kind of thing became what I was more known for than anything else.
And that's really, I suppose, what took you to October 2023. And I'd like to ask, really, with that heart, with that emotion, with that passion, what was it that happened in those days that make you really decide you just couldn't stay silent? You had your own show, but then things changed, I think, for everyone on the 7th of October 2023. What was it that changed for you?
I mean, I look back now and everything Everything changed for me on that day. And I look at the kind of process that I would follow with any kind of world event. I had a weekly show. I was doing breakfast radio at the time, a comedy show. So I did a comedy breakfast radio show for 5 years. And that was another challenge that presented itself in regards to, in the morning, you'd be laughing at things and trying to be as palatable as possible to the biggest possible audience. And at night, I was kind of delving into these kinds of issues. But for me, it was never the initial time I went on my show after October 7, there was not 1 second where I sat down and thought, I've got to be really careful here. You know, I've got to really think about whether or not this is worth doing. And maybe that's naivety. But for me, I saw what occurred, and it was good versus evil in the most clearest and simplest of ways. And so I went on my show, and I was staunch in my condemnation of the terrorists. I was appalled and sickened by what had occurred. And I was staunch in my support of the victims of that attack, which was Israel and the Jewish people. And of course, as we know, many others. Not thinking for a second it would be considered controversial, or that there would be kind of this blowback to it, which there was. And it was, again, I referenced earlier, I'm someone that is very used to being attacked online. It's something that's been part of my life for 20 years. I thought I was pretty battle hardened, but this was on a whole other level. I had to give my little girl to her dad for a period of time because things were considered too dangerous for her, given the credibility of some of the threats. It was, you know, and to be completely honest with you, it was a really scary time. But unfortunately for them, I am my father's daughter. And so the next Friday came around and I got back up and I went harder. And I think for me, there's never been any doubt whatsoever that I'm on the right side of history here. Never any doubt. I understand that propaganda can be very effective, and I don't look down upon those who have fallen victim to it, particularly people I know who I genuinely believe are well-intentioned. But for me, it has never been confusing in any way, shape or form. You know, it doesn't matter what they say or what they come at me with, which they have. Oh, this started well before October 7, Erin. And I say, absolutely, you're right, because the terrorists have been trying to kill Israelis well prior to that. Thank you so much for pointing it out. You know, it changed everything for me in that I saw it not just as a moment that was a huge danger to Israel and to Jews, a country that was democratic, free, and had done nothing to deserve what had happened to it and what's happened to it for many, many years, and what's happened to its people during the Holocaust. But the reaction around the world is what terrified me, to the point that I realized that silence was not an option here. So the Sydney Opera House, for example, 2 days after, I watched people in my own country chant, whether it was gas the Jews, F the Jews, kill the Jews, and celebrate the greatest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. And that to me wasn't overly surprising, because there is evil everywhere. There are people who hate who we are and our way of life, and who want to kill and believe in that ideology. That shouldn't surprise anyone. What terrified me and what did surprise me was the silence of fellow Australians in the aftermath of that night. Not October 7, but the celebrating of Australians outside the Opera House. And that was a moment like you have in any organisation, any country, any business, any club, any family. There are moments that challenge you, and moments that require you to stand up and say, not on my watch. That is not who we are. That is not who we stand for. And we failed miserably as a nation. And that terrified me. That's when I realized that this battle is not just yours. It's not Israel's. It's not the Jews. This is a battle for everything that I value and I believe in. And this is a battle for my 7-year-old daughter, who's currently, you know, in the room next door, definitely not playing on her phone. I would never allow such a thing. But it's a battle for everything that my dad was willing to give his life for, and all those who came before us. And the rot is already in all Western nations. And anyone who doesn't see this as a much bigger existential threat has their head in the sand, is silly, or is willfully in denial.
Well, that leads me actually very nicely to a question that's been sent in from one of your fans. And I'd like to read it to you in full, because it's such a heartfelt message. I think you'll enjoy hearing it in full. It says, I'm 61 and I've watched every episode of the Erin Molan show. I believe you have very few younger viewers. How do we get the message across to young people to counter the brainwashing by the Islamo left, particularly as our elites in universities, media, and other organizations appear to be predominantly communist ideologues? Thank you, thank you, thank you, from your number one fan. Now, I read it in full because actually there's a couple of things in there I want to ask you. One is, it's a good question. How do you get through that rot that you've just focused on yourself, which is underlying so much of this, got nothing to do with Jews even, but also, are you reaching, is this a correct assumption? Are you reaching older people? Are you skewing towards middle age and above, or are you actually able to cut through? And I don't say that personally. I know that from my own analytics, it is true that I think the older people get in the audience, the more aligned they seem to be with the views that you're putting out there. How in this era of TikTok and kind of quick opinions and feelings over facts are you managing to cut through to younger people?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you so much for that lovely question, and thank you for watching every episode. I very much appreciate that, very, very much. So thank you. It's fascinating, isn't it? There are days when I'll have, a 20. Do you like that your mummy's famous? It drives her insane when mummy gets asked for photos, and she hates it when I put love hearts over her face for public photos because I keep her identity. But I think, look, I love preaching to the converted because it's a very nice space to be loved, but I am wasted there. I say, I provide comfort, absolutely, and I help people feel less alone. I show people that not everyone believes what they do, but my goal is to reach as many people in that middle ground as possible, and preferably at a younger age, which is what we need to do. And I think for me, again, it's meeting them where they're at. And a big part of what I do, people who genuinely think they care about kids in Gaza, you don't want to fight them on that, because we all do and we all should. It's not about saying you shouldn't care about kids in Gaza, care about kids in Israel. It's about saying I care just as much as you do about kids being hurt in Gaza. I just understand who their enemy is. Let me help you. Let me show you who their enemy is. It's about meeting them where they're at and showing them that if you actually want to help kids in Gaza, currently there's only one country and one group of people doing anything to rid them of the evil terrorists who ensure their life is absolutely tragic, and that is Israel, and that's the Jews. And I think telling those stories, I like to pick out people personally and tell personalized stories. I say this hostage, this mum, like I'll have a mum on my show and I'll say to younger people, when you're older and you have kids, if you lose your child's hand for a second in a supermarket, wait till you feel that moment. Ask your mum. It's the worst feeling in the world. Imagine your baby in a tunnel for 700 days. And this mum hasn't breathed in 700. You've got to humanize people, I think, because they're so brainwashed to believe lies and to believe that Israel or the Jews are evil. And, it's utterly terrifying that it's successful and that it works, because I think it's utterly ridiculous. I don't find any of it effective, but it clearly is. So I think for me, it's younger people, you need to make them feel. You got to make them feel something, because so many of them are looking for something to feel and something to care about. Because look at Australia in schools. We're telling our kids that we're racist. We're telling our kids we're colonizers. We're telling our kids to not value who they are and where they come from, and that they should feel shame. And I know it happens in the UK. I know it happens in the US. It's happening all over the Western world. So how can we then be surprised when they are clinging on to something that says to them, hey, if you jump on board with this, it means you're a really good person and you care and you're going to help. So we're fighting on so many different fronts in this space. But I think, young people is absolutely key. And I think the more we can invest in genuine and authentic, not, the influencer kind of stuff, I think, and I've felt this for a long time in spaces far away from here, where you're trying to push something and it feels very commercial. That doesn't work. I think it's got to be authentic voices who want to be in this space, who care deeply, and who don't come at it from a height looking down, who come at it from, hey, I get it. The thought of a child suffering breaks my heart as well. But can I show you a couple of things? And I do this one-on-one. I do this on my show. I do this online. I'm a pain in the butt. Like, I'll be on a flight and the flight attendant will give me a Coke and I'll say, by the way, what are your thoughts? One-on-one, you can change the world with just these little conversations. And I try and do that a lot as well.
Well, that's interesting as well, because you were you put a lot of importance on actually going out to Israel after October the 7th, and you've been there several times since. In fact, I think, like me, you were there when the 12-day war kicked off, and so there was a sense of immediacy, being able to actually talk about it, report on it from the shelters as the missiles were incoming, as you were meeting people there. And tell me what helped you to really connect more with the people while you were there. What did you learn from them, both about Israel and them, but also about yourself?
Again, another great question. And by the way, I haven't fangirled enough about you. You are phenomenal. Some of your speeches I've sent to my family group chat. some of your debates, and you are superb at what you do. So thank you for everything that you do. Going to Israel was life-changing in many ways. The first trip straight after that I went to, which was I think December of the year of October 7, had never been before. And I didn't need to go to see to believe. I think that was very obvious from my commentary in the lead up, that I had seen enough. I wasn't one of those people that needed to see to kind of choose whose side I was going to be on. But what it enabled me to do was really experience firsthand the horror of what had occurred, and helped me then. I mean, I couldn't fight with more passion, but it gave me more ammunition to fight this information war with. And I went to the site of the Nova massacre. I went to the kibbutz. I stood in a room where 2 little girls who look exactly like my little girl burned alive, and their little brother having watched their parents be killed. I stood on the porch where the Beebus babies were taken. I forced myself to watch every single second of the raw vision, even though, again, and I say this, and this is, the ridiculous element of people saying, I can't believe you support kids being killed and genocide and all these, stupid things. That a headline about a child being hurt cripples me. My daughter having a blocked nose cripples me if I think she can't sleep properly. You won't find someone who feels things more deeply. And I wanted to go and I wanted to feel things in a way that you couldn't unless you were there. And I wanted to speak to people who had experienced it, and I wanted to basically immerse myself in it. But what it did for me, which I wasn't expecting, yes, the raw vision was horrific, and I got to not just see what they did that day, Hamas, but I watched their reaction to what they did. And that was the element that scared me more than anything else. It wasn't what they did. Dad fought Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Taliban. I'd heard stories and accounts firsthand of what they were capable of. But the level of joy they derived in what they were doing in these clips from October 7 terrified me. And that's, you try Macron and Starmer and Carney, you try living on the doorstep of people who not only do that, but enjoy it. Like, you try. But it was then walking outside of that room where those 3 little kids were burned alive, and walking to the kibbutz next door and meeting a woman who's watering flowers. And I gave her a hug and I said, do you live here? Is this your place? And she said, no, I don't know anyone here. I know a lot of hostages were taken from here. I drive an hour a week just to water the flowers. So when they come home, the flowers won't be dead. And that is Israel. That's the Jews. People like that. I went to the other kibbutz, and there was a group of blokes who were digging where Hamas had destroyed people's homes. And I went up to them again. Are these your homes? Are these your parents' homes? Not one of them knew a soul there. They'd come from New York. They were high-end architects who had given up 6 months of enormous pay, no doubt. I don't know what an architect in New York makes, but I'm assuming a fair bit. And they'd given up their time to come back because they felt helpless and they didn't want to be helpless. Like, that's who the Jews are. That is the Israelis. I walked around and I saw gatherings, people together. What did they chant for? Any group of Israelis or Jews gathered, the only thing they said was bring them home. When I looked at the other mob and what they said, Intifada, river to the sea, death to Jews, death to Israel, death to America, death to the West. Everywhere I looked, there was a reminder of how simple this was. If you want to boil it down to just, what does one side call for? Death. What does the other side call for? Their loved ones home, even dead. And so I left Israel, and after that first trip, horrified and changed in a way that I don't want to not be, but also images that will never leave my mind. The image of the dad jumping through the window with his son, and his other little boy running behind, and you see his face with the security cameras, and he knows that he's completely screwed. And the face of a father who knows he's not going to be able to protect his kids, even though he actually did. He lost his life doing so. That lives rent-free in my head. And I'm okay with that, because it reminds me why I do what I do every single day. So going back to Israel, I've been back a few times now, and I was there for the 12-day war. I'd gone for one night to get an honorary doctorate, which is, I'm an Australian girl who dropped out of uni 6 times, so I didn't complete a unit. So
well, Mazel Tov. Now Dr. Molan.
Dr. Molan, I was waiting for you to address me correctly. Thank you so much.
Sorry, absolutely.
And to go there for that one day, allegedly the foreign minister, who I've become quite close to, texted and said, "Oh, can you do a coffee? I see you're in town." I wrote back and said, "I'm only here for one night, Minister. I'm so sorry. You'll have to get me next time." And the next day, when the Iranian invasion started, he texted and said, "Sorry, I knew you weren't going to be here for just one day. Wish I could have told you." I went, "Do you know what, though? It was very confronting. It was very scary. We got hit right near our hotel. We're in Herzliya, and running to bomb shelters day and night. But I tell you what a privilege to be in Israel during that time for such a significant occasion." And of course, again, my father's daughter, I didn't stay in the hotel at the bar and bunker down. I went out to all of the sites, and I made sure I could show people. I did crosses to US networks. I did just interviews on my own Instagram channel, like a loser probably, but I didn't care. I went out and I said, I showed them, because I was reading the reports and they were framing this as this tit for tat. And I'm showing 2 major residential buildings that had been completely blown apart, a little girl with cancer killed, the elderly killed. And I'm saying, this is what the Iranian regime hits. And then I'm showing a window where a nuclear scientist who is developing weapons to basically destroy the world, and there's a hole in the window where Israel has struck and hit. And I was able to show people, this is not tit for tat. These are 2 very different nations with 2 very different values, fighting a war in 2 very different ways. So to me, that was such a privilege to be there. And I felt I ended up escaping through Jordan, and that was probably the scariest part of it all. My little girl started to get, she's pretty good when I travel, but she'd started to get it was getting a little bit hard. So I left, I think, on day 10, but I felt I hated leaving. If I didn't have her, I would have absolutely stayed. It ended up ending that night. The US came in, and I'm not going to say finish the job. I know Donald Trump would say he finished the job, but I think Israel did that themselves. But again, it's been such a privilege to be able to help show the world what is actually happening.
Now, you said that showed you like the real Israel and showed you what Israelis were really like. But then you've also said publicly that you saw a side of Australia after October the 7th, and what quite a lot of Australians were also like, and that it became a hotbed of anti-Semitism after October 7th. And I think that's true here as well in London, other parts of the UK, many parts of the world. The number of anti-Semitic incidents in Australia has surged. There's been, as you mentioned, that Gas the Jews chant, the Opera House. Jewish businesses have been attacked, graffiti daubed, bomb
synagogues,
synagogues firebombed, the Israel synagogue. Now, even with Iranian influence, with the IRGC influence there, as revealed by Mossad and intelligence agencies in Australia. So what does this tell us about, you learned a lot about Israel. What does it tell us about Australia, about the UK, about the West? What has this revealed about where we stand today?
Oh, it's revealed a lot, and not in a positive way. I remember my beautiful dad passed away about 8 months before October 7. And people, I live in a very Jewish area, which I'm very grateful for now, particularly. But he had passed away about 8 months prior, and people would often stop me in the street and say, "We're so sorry for your loss. Your dad was such an incredible ally of our Jewish community." And I would smile and give them a hug and thank them, and I'd walk away and I'd think, that was really lovely, but I could not comprehend why they would refer to him as an ally. I understood the Holocaust. I understood what Jewish people had been through, but not for a second did I comprehend what was simmering just under the surface. And again, the thought of ever not liking someone because of their religion, or because it just doesn't even, there's not a place where I can understand it. But I know it goes so much deeper than, it's irrational. I get that. But Australia, not for a second did I think we would see what we've seen. But again, I reference the Opera House, and only because I see it as such a defining moment. And I see it as not even from a cultural setting a standard perspective, but sorry, that is incitement to violence. That is hate speech. We have laws against that. So if we're going to have laws that exist to keep people safe in this country, yet we're not going to ever prosecute them or hold anyone to account, every other person in my country who is malicious, who wants to cause trouble, who is anti-Semitic, who does subscribe to the ideology that our enemies, do so much, watched that moment and waited. A day, 2 days, 3 days. Did one person pay a price for that? Did one person go to court, go to jail for breaking the law. And again, this is not free speech. It was hate speech. It was incitement to violence that is against the law. So had we as a nation come down hard on that and use the laws that exist to make a statement and to hold people to account who had broken the law, would we have seen a quarter of what we have seen in Australia in particular? Absolutely not. Had our Prime Minister, I mean, he said what he needed to say, but did he do anything meaningful to come out and again say, not on my watch? There is no way in hell a minority community in this country who has contributed so much, who are good, decent people who subscribe to our way of life, no way in hell on my watch will they be treated this way. No, he didn't. So everyone else who had that inside of them saw this green light. And then we just saw it completely explode. And of course, our Prime Minister was marching with pro-Hamas at university. He's appeasing the extreme left of his party. No backbone whatsoever in this space. And I look at the same with Starmer in the UK. I look at, don't even start me on Macron, who has just welcomed the president of Palestine, as he put in his social media post, that wet spinach leaf, just horrific excuse for a man, Emmanuel Macron, and calling him that and saying, together we will have peace and security. Mate, the bloke you are shaking hands with is currently ticking off on transactions to terrorists who have killed innocent children in pay for slay. Like, how can you expect any country with leadership or lack thereof like that, when they're looking at the top, people who aren't engaged, people who don't necessarily Google this subject every day, or like you or I, we live and breathe this. Most Australians feel far away from it. They feel like it doesn't impact them. That they're not stupid, absolutely. They're watching the commercial news each night, or they're watching the ABC. They're being told that Israel's awful. They're not going to then challenge that or investigate it. They look to their leaders for direction. So how can you expect any nation to have had any backbone in this space when those they elect to lead them and to show them the way, when their cost of living crisis, kids are driving them insane, husband's an asshole? Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say. Sorry, I'm Australian. I know you're all religious. My apologies. But my point is, some of the people who are part of this are not necessarily evil, but they don't have capacity. So they're looking for those they trust. ABC in Australia, it's our national broadcaster, like the BBC in the UK. Why would I not trust them? Headline example, day 722 of Israel's illegal invasion of Gaza. So if you're a mother with 4 kids working 3 jobs and you hear that as you're getting out of the car with the shopping, you go, oh, God, Israel's illegal invasion of Gaza. One of the commercial networks, the most watched in the country, started off one of the prisoner/hostage exchanges with the following: emotional music. You see a Palestinian man on the shoulders of another man sobbing, and they say, a family reunion, decades in the making. His mother's sobbing, the kids are sobbing, everyone's sobbing. It's this beautiful reunion. A family torn apart, languishing in an Israeli prison cell. Oh, and some hostages were released. End of story. So if you don't understand what's going on, you're watching that and your heart's going, oh my God, this man was taken away from his mother and his kids. And look, oh my gosh, evil Israel, they kept him apart. What they don't tell you is he blew up a bus that killed 12 people. That's why he's in a jail. So when you have media that sells this BS narrative to the masses, and the masses who feel far away, don't feel like it impacts them, believe blindly, you've got yourself a serious issue. And I think that's what we've experienced in Australia. And you look at the BBC, how many corrections a week? I'm like, they are criminal in what they have done. In so many ways, they are criminal. So much of the media has absolutely given credibility to terrorist lies. And they have played one of the biggest roles in where we find ourselves today. And again, it is criminal.
Absolutely. And I, we do recognise the same here in the BBC and other broadcasters. And so just as we're sort of coming to a close of the time that we have, I wonder if you could say a few words as to why you think that's happened, why you think these broadcasters are putting this strange agenda across. Is it idiocy? Is it laziness? Is it something more nefarious? And is there a sort of evil behind it? Because, of course, as you say, the population get what they're given in these platforms. But the people who are making the programs, you saw the truth. You decided to speak out because it was to you clear and righteous to do so. So why are so many people in the Australian or British or other media not doing so?
I think it's, again, I say it is complex, not because it is for them in regards to how to report the truth. That's not complex at all. But I just think there are so many different factors. I think for starters, and this is such a ridiculous statement, for starters, so many in the media are left-leaning, which should infer that they would stand with a minority who was attacked by terrorists. I mean, make that make sense. But I feel like this again, we're so terrified of anything that makes us look like, we're going against people of color, or we're colonizers. So we couldn't, there's this ridiculous perception in media, and it's gone so far the other way. You look at Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement. I mean, left-leaning people should be clamoring to support Israel and to support the Jews. I think that's one of the issues, in that they find themselves in this space where they feel like, this is pandering to an audience. You look at Australia, for example. So when I was working in breakfast radio, when I was working in commercial television that I was on for 15, 16 years, and then pay TV for the last 4 or 5 years, ratings boxes. So Australia, say population, like 30 million, there might be 5,000 ratings boxes or something ridiculous like that determine whether or not your network lives or dies. When you look at where they are located, and let me give you an example of Sydney, the biggest city in Australia. They are in Western Sydney predominantly. Where is the biggest Muslim population in Australia? In Western Sydney. What seats does the government need to win to form power? Western Sydney. So do with that what you will, but in a lot of ways, even well prior to October 7, I'd be sitting in my newsroom, and let's just say, for example, a woman's hit by a car on the Northern Beaches, which is a fairly affluent white area of Sydney. I'm trying to think how else to describe it. Northern Beaches, beautiful. We'd be like, I mean, really, like if we're doing a headline and we want to attract people to watch, it's just not that juicy. If someone's toenail in Western Sydney scraped a curb, we would send 8 crews out with a live cross, and we'd be like, major incident, Western Sydney. That would be our promos all day, because that's where the ratings boxes are, and you live and die by the ratings. So I think in Australia in particular, I'm not sure how it works anywhere else, that plays a big part. If you are trying to appeal to a certain audience, there's a certain narrative that's going to appeal to that audience. I think laziness is a big part of it. I think another big part of it and look, I've spent so much time dismantling the United Nations, the Red Cross, all of these farcical bodies that purport to stand for humanity but do the complete opposite. There is this belief, and I held it prior, and I feel almost ashamed that I held it prior, because I only cottoned onto this late, that they are trustworthy, that they stand for humanity, because the amount of times people say, but Erin, the United Nations. And I think that there's, even amongst journalists, that there's this belief that those organizations tell the truth, and they are impartial, and they are unbiased. I think that's a huge part of it. The amount of times networks in my country in particular will quote them, and that's almost their justification for anything. Whereas if you don't even need to dig deeper. They're evil. Most of them run cover for terrorists. I mean, look at who they put on the Human Rights Commission for Women. I mean, they are absolute failures in every way, shape, or form. I think that's also another significant part of how the media has failed so much, is those organizations who put information out that they then report as fact without understanding actually who makes up these bodies, and that they don't stand for good, that they're the complete opposite.
Absolutely. And I think, as well as being one of the few voices then that stands out in the media, you're also one of the few prominent non-Jewish voices who've taken such a strong and visible stand for Israel and for the Jewish people, as you've said. So why do you think, in that respect, again, so few others in your position have done the same? And on the flip side, while we're at it, why do you think so many Jews, so many in the Jewish community are so they have such a deep and almost personal need to see publicly non-Jews fighting their corner? It seems to be something, you're obviously very much appreciated for it, but do you think it's a strange feature of the Jewish community as well, that it's desperate for that?
Oh, I can understand it. I mean, it makes me deeply uncomfortable that people should feel grateful because I tell the truth. I mean, that is all I do. I tell the truth. I look at information and I tell the truth. So whilst I'm incredibly grateful for the love that I receive, it makes me very sad, but I understand it. And one of the things, I learned about the Holocaust, I think in year 4, And the part of it that has sat with me ever since, and that is I don't need to tell this audience how deeply disturbing that was as a young person to try and comprehend what had occurred to a group of people, I mean, who had done nothing wrong. But what I couldn't fathom was how people stood by and did nothing. And that to me is the part that went over in my mind for many, many years and months. And I've spoken to my mum about this. She said, you came home and you just kept asking, she said, if someone was at school hurting someone else, you would get in there and say, why are you being mean? Even at that basic level, I couldn't understand the silence of so many people who allowed that to occur. And not once did I ever think that I'd be tested in that space. But I think for me, and being a non-Jewish voice, in 100 years' time, God, and it makes me emotional just because my heart breaks for how few of us do it. But in 100 years' time, I'm not going to be someone that some child will learn about and think, why did they do nothing? I'll be someone that hopefully some child will read and think, well, I can do that too, because we've seen that this continues to occur, and I have no doubt it will occur again, which also breaks my heart. But I just feel like if it was me, if it was my child, if it was my religion, then I would be desperate for other people to stand with us, because we deserve it. This shouldn't be your fight. This is not your fight. This should not be the fight of Jews. It is criminal, again, that it is the fight of Jews, because we're all under threat here. And what threatens you threatens us in a much bigger way. There's less of you. It's coming for all of us. So selfishly, in some way as well, I stand with you because I love my child more than life. And I want a world for her that doesn't include this vile level of hate, and not even hate, because it's people who are acting on their hate. So, yeah, I think it's really sad how valued my voice is. It breaks my heart, but it's also an honor, and it's also something that I don't take for granted. And every person who stops me in the street, or who comes up to me at an event, or who sends me a message means the world to me, because I get so much on the other side that is so awful that this really fills my cup. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, Erin, before you go, I want to share one more note that came in from the audience. It says, thank you so much. In these difficult times, events such as this remind me that we're truly blessed, and that there are such courageous and eloquent people and allies in this world who are defending us. And I think that really captures what many people feel tonight. So Erin Molan, thank you for your courage, for your clarity, and for your friendship.
Thank you so much. Thank you for beautiful questions as well. I really enjoyed that. So thank you.